We were not respected with Biden. They looked at him falling downstairs every day. Every day the guy's falling downstairs. I'm very careful, you know, when I walk downstairs, like I'm on stairs, like these stairs, I walk very slowly. You don't have to set any record. Be cool. Be cool when you walk down, but don't bop down the stairs. So one thing with Obama, I had zero respect for him as a president, but he would bop down those stairs. I've never seen da-da-da-da-da-da, bop, bop, bop.
What the hell are you talking about? Obama, Obama, can we see footage of Obama going down the stairs?
Da-da-da-da-da-da, bop, bop, bop.
Okay, I stand corrected. I was wrong. I'm sorry.
Stephen Colbert on one of the perhaps lighter moments from President Trump's address to top military generals yesterday. We're going to go through some of the more concerning parts of the speech, including his comments about using American cities as training grounds for troops. Plus, we're now 6 hours into the government shutdown after Congress and the White House failed to reach an agreement on how to extend federal funding. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer will join us live from Capitol Hill to discuss the next steps for Democrats. So good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Wednesday, October 1st. And Joe, we have a lot to get to. We're in a shutdown.
Yep.
And that speech, I'm thinking with Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, and the president, in some ways you kind of felt like until you got to the part about the cities, could have been a Zoom, you know? Did you have to bring everybody in from all over the place? Jeez.
Well, and the address by Pete Hegseth, you know, the generals and the admirals, and they were all having to be seething with contempt, going, wait a second, I left my troops,
right.
I left the forward positions that I had been put in to defend America and defend American interests across the globe, to come have this guy lecture me about warrior ethos and some bizarre pep rally. And then Donald Trump came up, and as we said yesterday, you know, all of his talk was, I mean, he talked about everything but windmills. It was very strange, kind of meandering, strange because, again, it was like a campaign speech that you might have seen late in the campaign. That was Willie up until the very end when, as the Wall Street Journal says, Donald Trump told our military leaders that he may want to use the military against Americans, saying the enemy within, talking about using the United States military to train, think about this, to train on attacking Americans. That is, I don't care what party you're in. I don't care how MAGA you are. I don't care how long you've been supporting Donald Trump. You know, that's a serious breach. That's a breach not only of military tradition, that's a breach of the law. It's a breach in every way. There is no way that even Donald Trump's biggest supporters didn't hear that yesterday. And a part of them said, wait a second. That's just not what we as Americans do. We don't use the United States military to go after and attack Americans and use American citizens as, quote, practice.
Yeah, talking about American cities as training grounds for the United States military. You know who wasn't laughing, as some people said, oh, it was tongue-in-cheek. It was a throwaway line from the president. People not laughing were those generals and those admirals and those senior officers sitting there stone-faced. I think in many ways, both Secretary Hegseth and President Trump were surprised. They expected kind of a rah-rah pep rally, and they didn't get that from the people, as you say, who'd flown in, men and women from all corners of the world, left their posts to listen to Pete Hegseth lecture them about warrior ethos and wokeness in the military and everything else. They didn't get the response they expected. In fact, there were a couple of moments where Pete Hegseth sort of paused for a laugh or applause, did everything but the Jeb Bush please clap And these generals and senior leaders just sat there and watched, wondering what on earth they were doing there. And that was before President Trump, Mika, went into that meandering speech where he talked about President Obama coming down the stairs, why the quality of paper has gone down in the Oval Office, and on and on and on. It had the feel of one of those meandering late-stage campaign rallies, except the crowd was not cheering back at this one.
Yeah, probably a few other folks who are not laughing at those throwaway lines, Joe, would be some of the nation's governors and mayors who are already dealing with the potential or the reality of the National Guard coming in and what that could portend for the safety of their cities and their midterm elections.
Right. Well, you know, I'm actually still optimistic enough that even those that support Donald Trump had to understand that when you have a president talking about using the military to fight Americans and to use United States cities as training grounds, I mean, nothing. There's nothing reassuring about that, regardless of who you are. And I know, right now, watching, there are Republicans in the Senate. There are Republicans in the House who understand what an extraordinary breach that is. What he said was, and now is the time, because they held their right hand up. And they took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and the laws of this land. This would be a pretty good time for them to actually execute that oath and say, no, we don't use the United States military to attack Americans. We don't use the United States military to fight, quote, the enemy within, especially when Donald Trump is now defining enemies as public interest groups that oppose his politics. So anyway, a lot to talk about there, Mika. Yeah. Again, it was a very long, rambling speech. Pete Hegseth's speech did absolutely nothing to help him with the military brass. We have a lot to talk about there, and we're going to have General Hurtling here in a few minutes, and he will take us through the entire speech and what his concerns are.
Also joining us later on, General Barry McCaffrey. So we will get reaction from them. And again, I think that moment in those speeches yesterday, the president's speech especially, was signal, not noise, and we'll follow it. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have the co-host of our fourth hour, staff writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner joins us, staff writer for The Atlantic, Frank Foer, and co-founder of Punchbowl News, John Bresnahan. So, Joe, we have a lot to get to this morning.
Yeah, we really do. Frank Foer, before we get to the government shutdown, I would like your take. I understand. Well, I won't ask leading questions. I would just like your take on what that means, what the president said yesterday, that we've gotten to a point where the president of the United States feels free telling military generals from all over the world that he would like to use Americans as practice and use American cities as training grounds.
You know, his rambling speech makes the whole thing sometimes seem as if it's improvisational, but the aesthetics of this, the choreographing of this, the way that they spent all of this resources to import all of these generals and admirals, to sit them down and to lecture them as the president goes back and talks not just about using them to practice in cities as a training ground, but talks about the enemy within. Which is a phrase that we know that he's used specifically to talk about members of the media, to talk about federal workers, to talk about universities. And the aesthetics of this all reek of something profoundly autocratic and dangerous and un-American, something we've never seen before. And the message was only more so. And I couldn't help but think this scene where you have uncomfortable generals who are the one obstacle, perhaps, to him fulfilling some of his darkest dreams are sitting there. They're clearly deeply uncomfortable. But the message that Hegseth gave them, and that even the president gave them, was you're going to have to get with the program. And it was done in a bullying sort of way, where he mocked them for their beards, for being fat, and for potentially getting fired. And I think that the message there was that you're going to need to be pliant. And the Pete Hegseth message at the end of the day is that as you go after whoever you're going after, wherever you're going after them, you're going to be unleashed, that the shackles are going to be off, that if you are a toxic human being, it's okay. We want to encourage your toxicity. If you're going to be cruel, that cruelty is totally legitimate because it's what we expect and demand of you as warriors.